More than once this summer, we here at the Rachel Maddow Show showed up for work, all geared up to have our jaws dropped and our gobs smacked by the release of what we've been calling the Big Kahuna, the 2004 CIA Inspector General's report on torture. And every time we thought this report was coming, we instead had to find a different page one story. They still haven't released it. We first expected the report June 19th, then we got the news it was going to be delayed a week until June 26th, then it was July 1st, and now the release is delayed until the end of August, supposedly. This report details the investigation of the Bush administration's torture program as it was happening. It appears to have caused full-blown political panic inside the Bush White House when it was first completed in 2004. It's never been publicly released, but people who have seen it have described it as sickening. One person who has read it recently is Attorney General Eric Holder. Newsweek reporting that last month, the Attorney General holed up with the report in his office. He cleared his schedule for a full 2 days and read it cover to cover twice. After that, quote, 4 knowledgeable sources tell Newsweek that the Attorney General is now leaning toward appointing a prosecutor to investigate the Bush administration's brutal interrogation practices. Specifically, the Washington Post reported this weekend that prosecutions could be targeted at torture that went beyond the guidance in those now repudiated torture memos. When the Obama administration released those memos back in April, the president said at the time that no one acting in accordance with their instructions should be prosecuted. But he pointedly didn't say anything about people whose actions went beyond those instructions.
For those who carried out some of these operations within the 4 corners of legal opinions or guidance that had been provided from the White House, I do not think it's appropriate for them to be prosecuted.
But anyone who acted outside those 4 corners of those legal opinions? Meet the new Attorney General. Not at all the same as the last Attorney General. Joining us now is Michael Isikoff, Newsweek investigative correspondent, Newsweek investigative reporter, and MSNBC contributor. Mike, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Hi, Rachel.
Who's potentially in the spotlight here? Who is potentially going to be prosecuted?
Potentially CIA contractors and operatives who conducted the interrogations in the field. It is important to understand what this prosecutorial review, and it's a review, an investigation, it's not necessarily a decision to prosecute, is and what it's not. And I think there could be some disappointment by people who do think that the entire Bush administration interrogation policies and the people who crafted those policies and crafted those memos need to be investigated. They're not going to be. Did some reporting, further reporting today on this, what I'm hearing from senior officials is very clear. Only those who went beyond or potentially went beyond what was in those memos. Now, that's not nothing. That's important. It is worth noting that the same CIA Inspector General who prepared that report in May of 2004 also referred about a dozen cases to the Justice Department. That's the CIA Inspector General John Helgerson. A dozen cases to the Justice Department for potential prosecution. Only one was prosecuted, a guy in North Carolina, David Pissarro, but all the others were declined. Now, the Obama Justice Department, the Holder Justice Department, is going to take another look at those to see whether those cases that have languished for years should be reinvestigated and prosecuted.
On the issue of how I guess the remit here gets defined, how people figure out whether or not they might potentially be the target of prosecution here. If people are acting outside the bounds of the instructions from those torture memos, is it a foregone conclusion that they were freelancing, that they were making it up as they went along? Isn't it possible that they were taking those actions on orders? They were being directed to do those things. Couldn't it go further up the chain of command?
I talked to some defense lawyers today who said that is absolutely inevitably going to be the defense, that of anybody who comes within the comes up in this prosecution. The defense lawyers are going to say they were relying and doing what their superiors knew about and told them to do, that the guidelines in those memos were ambiguous and fuzzy, and they had every reason to believe that when they waterboarded one detainee 183 times or another 83 times, they were doing what they believed their superiors wanted them to do. And so these, I think everybody recognizes, these are going to be difficult cases to bring precisely because of a defense like that.
What would these people be charged with conceivably, looking at those previous dozen cases that were brought up by the Inspector General under the last administration and what we know about what's in that Inspector General report now?
That is a very interesting question, because I do know from reporting today that that in at least one case, the Inspector General wanted the individual to be prosecuted for torture, for violation of the federal torture statute. What inevitably happened in that case and in others was that the Bush Justice Department shied away from bringing any cases along those lines. They looked at it for potential assault charges, in some cases homicide, because some of these guys did die in CIA custody. They didn't bring any homicide cases, but the answer from the Holder people is that was the Bush Justice Department. That's not necessarily what this Justice Department is going to do when they relook at these cases.
Last question, very briefly, Michael. Is this a done deal, or is it still being debated?
I think it's pretty far along. As my colleague Dan Kleidman reported this weekend in Newsweek, Holder is leaning in this direction. He's still leaning in this direction even after the potential blowback today. But you never know in Washington. I think inevitably this is going to be controversial. So until it's a done deal, it's not a done deal.
This is the first day of what is going to be a hot story for a very long time. Michael Isikoff, MSNBC contributor, investigative correspondent for Newsweek. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Rachel.